Good morning, and thank you all for being here today. My name is Sydney Burgess, and I am the division head who oversees many of CARB's incentive programs, as well as off-road, medium, and heavy-duty emissions regulations. So this portfolio includes the advanced clean fleets regulation and incentives for zero-emission trucks that you've heard about in earlier panel discussions. But for today, I'm your session moderator. So to help get us started in talking about the public opportunities for zero-emission drayage trucks, I'd like to welcome Assemblymember O'Donnell. Assemblymember O'Donnell is well known to many of you, but by way of introduction, he was first elected to State Assembly in November 2014 to represent the 70th District, which includes Long Beach, San Pedro, Signal Island, and Catalina Island. He is a former Long Beach City Council member and a teacher with over 20 years of experience, and as a chair of the Assembly Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement, and the representative of the two busiest ports in the Western Hemisphere, the Port of Los Angeles and Long Beach. He works to educate his colleagues on the complex challenges and the opportunity faced by the freight sector, supply chain, and logistics industries. Assemblymember, it's my honor to turn this over to you for opening remarks.
Great, thank you. And thank you to the CARB team for the invitation to be here today. And thank you for all you've done in the past in partnership with really often the private sector to go green. There's been a lot of work done, a little bit more to do, of course, but there's been a lot of work done. I think we should acknowledge a lot of work has been done, and it's there's more to do. But again, I chair the Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement up in the Sacramento Capitol, of course, on the Assembly side. I represent the 70th Assembly District, which covers both ports. That's Long Beach and LA ports. And I know what a job creator they are, and I want to keep them the job creator they are. And I want them to go green, but I also want them to make green while they go green. That's very important to me. So what I really want to emphasize here today is I thank CARB for reaching out and holding conversations like this, because it's very important to have communication between often what are two communities. There's the governmental regulation community, and then there are those who actually do the work on the ground, move the goods. So I appreciate that you're having this conversation today. That there's outreach. Outreach is very important. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer that we remain technology neutral, that we don't say, hey, this is the best technology, but that our job as a governmental entities is to set the bar and let industry innovation meet that bar. So again, I just can't say enough for the opportunity to just say hi today and watch a little bit and listen, learn, my staff too, and make sure that whatever we're doing is economically feasible, commercially viable, and will work for everybody. Help us go green and make green at the same time, as I've said. I also want to point out Hector De La Torre, one of your board members there, who also sat in the Assembly many years ago, and I know he's very involved in today's meeting as well. So with that, I'm just going to turn it back to you and say thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to watch some outreach and to learn as well. So with that, I turn it back to you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Assemblymember. Really appreciate you taking the time to kickstart our conversation today. So shifting to the panel discussion, thank you to all of you for joining us, and special thanks to those who submitted questions. I'm joined today by a really wonderful panel who I'm going to ask to introduce themselves. First, Elizabeth John from CEC.
Good morning. My name is Elizabeth John, and I'm an office manager with the California Energy Commission's Fuels and Transportation Division. My office oversees grant funding activities for zero and near zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles and vehicle infrastructure. Specifically, we handle low carbon fuel production, zero emission school bus deployment, and freight and transit activities. And of late, we have made a big push towards MDHD ZEV infrastructure. And over the summer, we released solicitations for over $100 million in funding to support MDHD ZEV infrastructure throughout the state. So it's a really exciting time. And I know there's going to be some challenges along the way, but I'm really happy to be here and to have this conversation with you.
Wonderful. Really appreciate you bringing your expertise to the panel, Elizabeth. Next up, Naveen Berry from South Coast Air Quality Management District. Naveen? Unmute, please.
Good morning, and thank you for giving South Coast AQMD an opportunity to participate in this project. I'm the Assistant Deputy Executive Officer in our Technology Advancement Office. The office, and specifically me, has been actively working on advanced technology that lowers criteria pollutant emissions for more than 30 years now. And we've also provided, through various incentive funds, the incremental cost to cover and implement and deploy these cleaner technologies for more than 25 years through various programs. So I'm really pleased to participate in this meeting to discuss deploying up to 800 electric trucks, and even more related that now we have the technology for some of the duty cycles, at least, to deploy these trucks in 2021. So it really is a fantastic goal. So South Coast and a large part of my career, as I indicated, I focus on deploying zero emission Class 8 trucks or other types of trucks. I remember working on developing the first battery electric yard tractor back in 2008, and laying that groundwork for heavy duty zero emission technology pathways. I wish all of the 800 trucks would be deployed in the South Coast AQMD, considering we continue to have the worst air quality in the nation and the largest number of community air protection program communities within our region. And you've heard that from several speakers earlier today as well. However, the 800 trucks are a very small part of our emission reduction needs. We need about 200 times greater scale over the next few years to achieve the NOx reductions needed to get to some of the ambient air quality standards that impact us. So we continue to focus our efforts on other near zero emission technologies as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Naveen. Yes, the air quality and public health challenges are particularly problematic in South Coast. So we're just really pleased to have your expertise and a wealth of experience to bring to bear on this panel today. Now, last but not least, Tom Brotherton from CalSTART. Tom?
Thanks, Sid. My name is Tom Brotherton, and I'm the Director of Market Acceleration at CalSTART. So I oversee our work managing incentive projects. We have several of those in California. The HVIP project, which is now in its 11th year, provides incentives for trucks and buses. All of that funding comes through CARB. CalSTART administers it on behalf of CARB. And more recently, CORE, which is the off-road equipment equivalent to HVIP, which is only a year old. So that's the baby on the block. And then even yet to launch is the CEC Infrastructure Block Grant, which is Elizabeth's project. And that will launch a bit later this year. That's really important because that can provide infrastructure incentives that complement programs like HVIP Core and even other folks who have heavy duty vehicles, medium and heavy duty vehicles, regardless of whether they got an incentive in California.
Great, thanks, Tom, and appreciate the shout out to CORE. You've made a lot of CARB staffers, not to mention stakeholders, very happy with that mention. So thank you for bringing that to bear as well. So to start us off, we've spent some time on this on the various panels this morning, but just in the interest of getting us centered, I'm really interested in talking a little bit about the baseline state of zero emission drayage and truck market and technology. As the goal of this panel is really to discuss the role of incentive programs, to support zero emission truck deployments that are going out now. So Tom, given your expertise and work with CalSTART, there seems really exciting activity in the area of zero emission trucks. Can you paint a picture of the state of play with respect to, who is ready to deliver in a time frame consistent with this effort that Project 800 is bringing forward?
So it really is an exciting time for these zero emission tractors, which is really the whole basis of Project 800. And what's really surprising, maybe not surprising, but we've had a whole bunch of different original equipment manufacturers all bringing product to market just within the last year or so. So HVIP, which I mentioned is the heavy duty, medium and heavy duty incentive project in California. We have 6 zero emission tractors already eligible in HVIP. Now I'll mention that HVIP should open by about April of this year for a new funding round. So you can't request a voucher today, but you will by about April of this year. So these manufacturers are BYD, Freightliner, Kenworth, Lion, Peterbilt, and Volvo. Every one of those original equipment manufacturers has an eligible zero emission tractor already in HVIP. So you can order these trucks this year. Some will probably, might be by the end of the year before any deliveries start. I will mention that these are not going to be the very first trucks these manufacturers build at all. Many of these manufacturers have already participated in pilot projects, some of which CARB themselves have even funded. So this is by no means brand new technology. They're new to HVIP, but HVIP is really for commercialized vehicles that have typically gone through some sort of pilot project phase already. I'll also mention that it's not just battery electric trucks that are coming to market. Fuel cell trucks, really the close cousin for zero emission. There's some great work there. So Kenworth and Toyota are launching 10 fuel cell Class 8 tractors in Southern California. And of course, Nikola, which almost everybody's heard of, is many years into the development of a fuel cell tractor themselves. So while those two trucks are not yet in HVIP, we could expect them fairly soon, and they'll be a nice complement to, as I mentioned, those 6 different OEMs that have battery electric trucks already in HVIP.
That's really wonderful. It certainly does seem like the future is now. You know, it just seems like a few years ago we were debating whether or not passenger trucks could be electrified, and now there's seemingly a new product announcement every week. Not to mention the electrification and the heavy duty sector. So it really seems like that is what you're seeing in the incentive program space as well. It's really great to hear. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, you know, CEC has been actively engaging in this space for quite some time. Given the state of the market, given that the future is now, what incentives or programs does CEC have going this year that you think zero emission truck manufacturers or fleets looking to purchase zero emission trucks would be interested in?
So we've had quite a few funding solicitations this year. Some of them are wrapping up and some of them are just getting started. Like Tom mentioned earlier, we're really excited about our new infrastructure block grant, which is intended to complement programs like HVIP and CORE with zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And so we expect that to be coming in the next year, and we're really excited to get stakeholders on board to understand what the needs are and where we can include additional funding. In our last investment plan, for the first time, we proposed a 3.5-year funding schedule, and we've really made an effort to put a lot more funding into medium duty, heavy duty ZEV infrastructure. So over the next few years, we're ramping up funding for the medium duty heavy space as we're slowly ramping down light duty as we're meeting to fill the gaps between public and private investment. And then we have a number of research solicitations that we have open now, which may be of interest. And I think, so in our research division, we have a solicitation called the Research Hub for Electric Technologies and Truck Applications, or RETA. And that research hub will engage stakeholders to advance high power charging systems and to plan, design, and deploy innovative corridor charging strategies that extend the range and increase the operational flexibility of battery electric trucks. And this hub will also work to efficiently coordinate deployment of both corridor and private depot charging infrastructure, which will be critical to support rapid transition to ZEV drayage trucks. And then I'll quickly highlight one of our really exciting projects, our first joint solicitation with CARB. CEC and CARB staff are working collaboratively on a $44.1 million solicitation. And if you're looking for it, it's GFO-20-606, and applications are due on February 15th. CARB has allocated $24 million towards the purchase of zero-emission Class 8 drayage trucks, and CEC has allocated $20.1 million to be applied toward the fueling infrastructure for those trucks and workforce development. And so the goal is to demonstrate 50 or more trucks with 1 to 2 fleets that will test truck OEMs and electrical grids to determine their readiness and ability to handle a full-scale deployment. And if this solicitation is successful, it could be a model for future solicitations on combining funding resources from different programs for large-scale holistic projects.
Yeah, that one's really exciting, Elizabeth. I'm glad you mentioned it in your remarks. We've been hearing for a number of years from stakeholders that doing something just like this was something that stakeholders in the market would really appreciate, given the relative expertise of the different agencies and the relative ability for us to access different funding pots. So a really wonderful opportunity to come together and particularly work with your team on that. So really appreciate your leadership on that, Elizabeth. For the local perspective, Naveen, you in particular, and South Coast, as a district, has really been working to ensure that your programs and the efforts that you're working on can help achieve, much needed pollution reduction and community benefits in your particular area. So, same question to you. What initiatives or programs does the district have going this year that you think manufacturers or fleets might be interested in?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, the South Coast AQMD continues to have a broad range of incentive programs that include funds, and I'll specifically hone in on zero emission trucks. One such program is the statewide Volkswagen funding for zero emission Class 8 trucks. Currently, that pot of $27 million in funds under the first installment is oversubscribed, but we continue to develop a more robust backup list to address any potential fall through in those applications, as well as gauging the level of interest to determine when we want to release a follow-up solicitation for the remainder $63 million that's also available for the zero emission Class 8 trucks. So that'll be coming soon in the future as well. Another open solicitation is under our Prop 1B program, which is currently open. It'll be open until about April of this year and is available for applications for near zero emission and zero emission trucks with up to $200,000 for zero emission trucks available today. We've partnered with the ports and many other entities to provide outreach for that, to try to focus in on some of the trucks, especially those around the ports that may be able to take advantage of this funding. In March, a couple of months from now, we plan to release the solicitation for the Carl Moyer program again, which will also be used for funding requests specifically for mobile source programs that may be implemented with the Community Air Protection Program fund. So we're leveraging those funds also for these types of projects. Zero emission trucks can also be requested under this Carl Moyer process, but based on the guidelines today, and I think we'll have subsequent discussions on what we can do to address some of these, but based on the guidelines, and especially depending on the vehicle miles traveled under the Carl Moyer program, it can reduce funding amounts below other competitive programs that I mentioned as well. But those are some of the key programs that we either have open currently or will be opening up shortly.
That's really great to hear, Naveen. Lots of opportunities there. We're talking about current incentive opportunities. I do want to pivot really quickly to a question that we've received from one of our audience members. The question is, what funding can be made available in the future for related incentives, and how can incentive dollars be made available with some semblance of certainty, for the benefit of the market and the fleets and the technology? And I've also received a related question about who's paying the bills for these programs. So I'll take a moderator discretion here and maybe kick us off a little bit and then open it up to the rest of the team here. But, for some background, for those of you who are less familiar with kind of the origins of a lot of the different incentive programs that we're talking about, with respect to paying the bill, currently the communities living around ports and other areas of concentrated vehicle activity, really community health is what's paying for the bill right now for large intensive commercial operations. Specifically in terms of where dollars are coming from for various incentive programs, really when it comes down to it, it's a polluter pays. So specifically, many of the incentives that CARB receives for these programs are appropriated annually by the legislature. So for the fiscal year 2020/2021 budget, the governor's proposed budget, that proposal includes about $360 million total in cap and trade proceeds for various programs that can be used in the zero emission truck space, not necessarily exclusively focused on zero emission trucks, but various programs that include zero emission trucks. A few examples of those, which you heard Naveen mention earlier, include the AB 617, our Community Air Protection Program, heavy duty zero emission investments category, and the farmer program, which is a program that's set up to help provide local air districts resources to incentivize cleaner agricultural equipment, including heavy duty trucks. So a number of other programs, or a number of these programs, including AB 617 and Carl Moyer, can also include funding for zero emission infrastructure. So really there's a whole ecosystem that we're talking about here. So with that, Elizabeth or Naveen, can you talk a little bit about the proposed budget from your perspectives? My statements were certainly, more from a CARB-centric program specific paradigm, but can you tell me about the proposed budget from your perspectives or opportunities there or elsewhere that you see?
Ladies first, Elizabeth.
Thank you. So the Energy Commission administers a program called the Clean Transportation Program, which is funded a little bit differently than CARB's programs. There's a tiny fee on all vehicle registrations that goes towards the program, and we administer about $100 million per year for Clean Transportation Program projects. As I mentioned earlier, we recently released a 3.5-year investment plan, which lays out a picture of how we expect our funding to look. But that being said, each year we convene an advisory committee to talk about the needs of the various regions around California and the various vehicle sectors to understand where funding should be put. And with that in mind, I expect probably in Q1 of this year that our Freight and Transit team will be putting together a workshop to receive stakeholder feedback to know exactly where that money should go and where the need is. So it does, we do get a lot of stakeholder input. We do seek feedback and we try to make our process very public and open so that we're making sure to get the money where it needs to go.
So from the South Coast perspective, one of the linchpins for our last 2016 air quality management plan was really finding the incentive funds to deploy those technologies in an accelerated manner. We've had some success. We've gotten funding through the federal programs, including EPA's targeted airshed and DARE grant programs, and I can kind of touch on fund awards that we received in 2020 that we are getting ready to deploy in 2021. And those will help us deploy an additional 100 zero emission trucks, we believe, either in 2021 or soon thereafter. And then there are also several ongoing projects where we're working on fuel cell Class 8 trucks that are still in the demonstration stage, but we hope that that will leapfrog as rapidly as battery electric trucks have. So we're continuing to look at those aspects. The other area locally that we're able to leverage is our Mobile Source Air Pollution Reduction Review Committee, or known as MSRC, and they continue to provide significant resources to deploy zero emission or near zero emission trucks, both at the ports as well as the inland empire, or what we call the inland ports, where all the distribution centers are mainly located. So we look forward to implementing some of these in 2021, but I would be remiss to say that, other funding sources that we continue to leverage are the Southern California Edison's Charge Ready Transport Program for infrastructure, as well as our local ports that partner with us regularly to also provide funding for some of these programs.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much. A lot of opportunity, definitely, both at the local level and the state level. Tom, I'm interested in your perspective. You help implement programs very similar to a lot of the programs that CARB implements, both with respect to HVIP and CORE and other states. And I'm wondering, just given your kind of global view and perspective, on incentives, what in your mind are some of the lessons learned or best practices that we should be thinking about as we're moving forward on Project 800?
So Sid, you're right. We actually used HVIP as a model and replicated that incentive work in New York and Chicago. and really to similar results. The scale is not nearly the same as California, but I think that the results so far have been. And I go even a little more broadly, and let's look around the world where we track a lot of the sales of these vehicles. And some of the work that's really had great success in Europe, they do a lot of things that they kind of even go beyond sometimes what we do here in California. So some of those examples are they can set sales regulations, which is sort of a parallel to the advanced clean truck regulation. But they also have purchase incentives on top of that, which we do have in California. Now, here's something that we don't have in California. They have restrictions on the use of internal combustion engines, especially in city centers. So there's a real need for those fleets who just have to be in that urban city center, but are prohibited from bringing in a truck that has an internal combustion engine. Boy, that really is some incentive. And then finally, very high taxes on gasoline and diesel, as well as road taxes. And some of those costs that increase the cost of operating conventional technology are not necessarily applied to the fuels for zero emission technology. So all things considered, if you look at some of those suites of policy options combined, that's why they're really having some significant traction in Europe and getting zero emission trucks. And I would say Europe has had greater luck with the implementation of fuel cell trucks compared to the United States. So that's pretty heartening to see. And I think that we can take that as a sign that it should be coming here as well.
That's really helpful to hear, especially with respect to the opportunities to leverage different policy instruments. It seems that from your statements, other jurisdictions have been able to leverage both incentives as well as disincentives to help propel the market forward.
Exactly.
I'm wondering, when you think about CalSTART does a lot of work with truck manufacturers, and when you look at kind of this breadth of experience, across incentives or disincentives, what's the most meaningful, given California's state of the market, what are the most meaningful or most impactful policies that you think we should be bearing in mind?
So I think we've talked about two of the big ones. One is to reduce that incremental cost. And certainly a program like HVIP hits that right on the head. And it does it pretty cleanly. What I mean by that is HVIP provides a direct cash on the hood reduction in the purchase price of a truck to a fleet right at the time of the purchase. So there's no waiting around for a rebate to come later or a tax credit that comes the next year, or the uncertainty that may be associated with a rebate that you haven't filed yet. Secondly, infrastructure, and we spent a lot of time talking about infrastructure, and that's a big one. That really is big. So even though that doesn't directly support a truck manufacturer, it's really important for a customer of these new trucks to be able to both reduce that purchase price so that it's at least close to the incumbent technology price, as well as deal with what could be a significant infrastructure cost. And not only the cost, but just the unknown of where do I start? How do I start planning for infrastructure for a technology that I'm unfamiliar with? So I think between those two, you've hit two of the biggest barriers. And then Sid, I know in the next panel that follows ours, we're going to talk about some of the particular barriers to, say, small customers. So not only do big fleets have to worry about how to pay for a vehicle, how to build infrastructure, but for small fleets, there's some more practical considerations like, where am I going to park this truck that either needs to be plugged in or may have other specific infrastructure fueling considerations? So I think that as we move forward, we should see initially some of the larger fleets buy these vehicles, but we want to think ahead to that next wave where we're really targeting some of the smaller fleets, especially those in disadvantaged communities. And I think we are going to have to start thinking more creatively about what other policy goals and incentive structures could be brought to bear to get some of these smaller fleets to participate instead of just the larger fleets.
That's a really good point, Tom. And it'll be interesting to see how the market adjusts and adopts over time, with the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation, which requires manufacturers to bring zero emission trucks to market starting in 2024 across a range of weight classes. It'll be interesting to see how those prices come down and how these technologies provide more options for consumers, whether you be a large fleet or a small fleet. It'll be interesting to see how ACT, helps drive some of those changes. And then, of course, CARB is working on the Advanced Clean Fleets regulation right now, which is kind of the complement to ACT, which is really looking at where are the opportunities for fleets to bring on the zero emission technology, where's the technology most apt right now, how can we help ensure that as manufacturers are investing in these zero emission trucks, how can we ensure that customers are also, ready and available to absorb this technology. I want to go back to something you mentioned, Tom, which is hitting on some of the themes that we heard in earlier panels around infrastructure. And Elizabeth, I'm wondering if you could help provide us, kind of a broad perspective, from the CEC perspective, how do we make sure that the right infrastructure is deployed as these different trucks at different classes, different duty cycles, different needs are entering the market, and really, what's the role of the state, in terms of coordinating all these efforts across agencies and deploying the right infrastructure to market. So maybe a little bit on multi-state agency collaboration as well.
Sure, absolutely. To the first question about how do we get the right infrastructure deployed, I think the number one lesson learned we have from our funded demonstration projects is to practice good planning. And planning is going to be foundational as fleets start converting to zero emission vehicles, especially with large fleets requiring greater power loads. And along these lines, it's never too early for fleet owners and operators to begin thinking about transitioning their fleets, even if they think it may be years away. So I think engagement with utilities as early as possible is really important. I know utilities now have a lot of fleet planning tools and other resources available for fleets to use. And we should encourage engagement with government agencies early, especially along the lines of permitting processes. And there are a lot of early adopters already out there. So I think it's important to integrate lessons learned from the ongoing light duty ZEV transition into our MDHD ZEV planning, while still understanding that there will be different obstacles or challenges that each sector may face. Specific to CEC funding programs, in mid-July, we released a funding opportunity for blueprints for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle infrastructure. And we did receive a lot of interest in that area. So staff are currently evaluating applications. But I think those blueprints will help provide lessons learned and could be something that a wider audience of fleet owner and operators could replicate. And then additionally, the CEC is developing a model which we are calling heavy load, which aims to project number, locations, and types of chargers needed to electrify California's on-road MDHD vehicles. And this will be similar to CEC's electrical vehicle infrastructure projections tool, or EVI Pro, as we're calling it, which is used to assess charging infrastructure needs for light-duty vehicles. And then we also know that vehicle grid integration will provide potential benefits for MDHD fleets. So thinking about how to incorporate VGI will be important. And VGI strategies should not compromise any of the system's reliability or cost effectiveness. So that'll be really important when planning infrastructure. And then to your second question about the role of the state, I think first I want to acknowledge that there is a combination of legislation, regulation, and executive orders in California that has sent a strong signal that California is moving in the direction of MDHD ZEVs. And so understanding that landscape and seeing that there's going to be a big push towards converting California's existing heavy-duty fleet. As I mentioned before, the CEC is proposing a long-term focus on ZEV infrastructure for trucks, buses, and off-road equipment, not only in the role of providing incentive funding, but also in being good partners to city governments, private companies, and local communities. And I also want to emphasize that our focus will be to provide opportunities for different technologies, both in the battery electric and hydrogen electric space, to increase their viability in the future market. I've talked about some of our funding opportunities, but there are a few of the state efforts that go beyond funding. AB 2127 is an effort by the CEC to create a biennial report assessing statewide charging infrastructure for all classes of electric vehicles in relation to the 2030 policy goals. And we've released our first assessment on January 7th, and the report expands upon the CEC's EV infrastructure projections and now includes MDHD on-road vehicles and port, airport, and off-road vehicles. And we did seek data and input from stakeholders, electric utilities, transit agencies, environmental groups, and local communities. So that will be a good resource. And then like you said, I think collaboration with other state agencies, this may be, as we grow, this may become a national issue. For example, in long haul trucking, standardized infrastructure is going to be needed across state lines and good movement corridors. So there's going to need to be leadership beyond California. So I think we can draw on our experiences with the light duty sector, maybe looking at groups like the West Coast Electric Highway, and developing similar collaborative organizations with our various funding agencies throughout California.
Those are really great points, Elizabeth. And I like what you brought up at the end about, these challenges and opportunities that go across state boundaries. I mean, certainly with the Biden administration announcing various zero emission vehicle and truck goals, potentially there are more opportunities than there once were to align both state policy instruments as well as federal policy instruments around this goal of more widespread electrification. Much more exciting time than it used to be. Naveen, I wanted you bring a unique perspective given your role at the local district level. I'm wondering what opportunities you see, locally or more broadly for supportive initiatives. We're talking a little bit about infrastructure, but other, it could be infrastructure or other supportive policies where you see a real opportunity to help promote CE.
So yeah, I think we've touched on it briefly, but just to reiterate, South Coast AQMD has really had a robust research and demonstration program that seeks to get zero emission trucks ready for the commercial market. And certainly, as Tom pointed out, we've had some pretty good success, and a lot of kudos goes to ARB and CEC on their vision for increasing the numbers or the scale of some of these demonstration projects under the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund and ZANZEF programs. We've managed to work closely and really demonstrate in the real world technologies from Volvo and Daimler and Peterbilt and BYD and Elion that have now resulted in, as Tom indicated, commercial product and certified and eligible for HVIP funding. So those type of programs, I think, are fantastic. And, in addition to CEC and ARB that I mentioned, the Department of Energy and US EPA have also been fantastic partners in helping us demonstrate those. And we continue to do that effort to a great degree, increasing that confidence level and, moving that technology readiness level marker to the right towards a 9 fairly rapidly. And we're continuing to do that effort with fuel cell trucks as well. And as Tom indicated, we certainly see some deployments of fuel cell trucks in Europe and in parts of Asia. And we're working with some of the local entities with some other funding that's available for research to also show those as moving down that technology readiness level chart to get them fully commercialized. I personally believe that those are going to be a fantastic opportunity for long haul transportation, and certainly, going off of Elizabeth's comments, West Coast Collaborative and working with US EPA, looking at these goods movement corridors that are really vital to accomplishing that interstate commerce with zero emission trucks. We're continuing to work on that effort as well. And as I indicated, the early success of the demo program is now kind of the base work for the Volkswagen zero emission Class 8 truck category that I described earlier as well, that we've gotten such a tremendous demand for it. So we're going to continue working on it. And I have to throw this in. The South Coast also hopes to compete for the solicitation that Elizabeth described, the joint solicitation between ARB and CEC, to again deploy 50 or even 100 more zero emission trucks under that program. So I think these types of collective efforts continue to accelerate that adoption process, and it gives fleets more confidence in their ability to run their operations. And we're actually working with fleets that are looking at changing over their whole fleet at particular locations into zero emission trucks. And I think once we can accomplish showing that the trucks work and that we have a pathway and perhaps a partnership and funding for a pathway towards the infrastructure, that model can be duplicated anywhere. It could be duplicated within California, it could be duplicated nationally. And that's what I'm really excited about as the kind of the next big frontier and step.
Great, really exciting, Naveen. And just for the record, because I know this is being recorded, Elizabeth and I cannot react to your statement about applying for the joint drainage solicitation.
I recognize
Let the record show, Elizabeth and I did not react. No, but seriously, thank you for your comments, Naveen. That's really helpful in terms of rounding out the discussion. We've gotten a few questions from the public, and I'd be curious to get all of your perspectives on this. We have a commenter who noted that there is inequity in terms of distribution, or perceived inequity in terms of how various heavy duty incentives are distributed. And so they noted some of this is natural, but some of this is just because of who is in the know with respect to these programs. A lot of the incentive programs we've been talking about today are either first come, first serve, or they're competitive grants. And so I'm curious, to hear each of your experiences about, efforts we've undertaken or undertaking, to make sure that more folks are aware of the incentive opportunities when they do become available. So Tom, given your experience with HVIP and CORE, I'm wondering if you can speak to this a little bit first.
Yeah, so we sort of do a combination of making sure that at least manufacturers know that these incentives are around, and especially that we hopefully prompt them, who some of the truck OEMs who may not have dipped a toe in the water, and they certainly all have now. So I think that's worked. We can check that box. Then on the fleet side, we do a fair amount of outreach where we try to at least reach fleets, let them know about these opportunities. I will mention in the upcoming year of HVIP, we're going to take some explicit measures to try to provide access at different points during the program for fleets who may not be Johnny on the spot and ready to try to jump on that first come, first serve incentive the moment it opens. So we're going to try to do some waves of funding to hold back some funding. So even those fleets that might need a little more time to line things up can make it work for them. And then if you look at some of the equity issues, we do provide a bonus for fleets that are in disadvantaged communities who participate in HVIP. So they qualify for an extra 10% of the incentive amount. And so today we're talking about zero emission drayage trucks. That would be a $150,000 incentive in HVIP. You get an extra 10% if that vehicle is deployed in a DAC. So not only are we reaching out to some of those fleets to make sure they're aware of the opportunity, we want to sweeten the pot for those fleets that are in a DAC to really encourage them to even more strongly participate in the program. One more thing, Sid, I'll mention is we will be tracking the progress of Project 800 on the HVIP website. So not only the progress of vouchers that go to these drayage trucks, but we'll be including any truck that's been ordered in California, any zero emission drayage truck. We'll be working with the manufacturers, with other funders who have incentive projects that might parallel projects like HVIP. And we're going to be polling them on a very regular basis to keep track of how we're progressing in this statewide goal to hit 800 by the end of the year.
That's fantastic. Can't wait to see those numbers shoot up. It's going to be very exciting. Keep tabs there. I'm wondering if I might pin you down a little bit more, since we do have, fleets and dealerships, watching today. I'm wondering if you could, take a little bit of time potentially just to walk through the HVIP process itself. What's the dealership role, how the payment works, some of the high level logistics that I think people might be interested in.
So HVIP has really been developed to be easy on the customer. So at its core, an HVIP request requires an eligible vehicle dealer and a fleet. So when that fleet goes in to visit a dealer who has an eligible HVIP product and they agree on ordering a truck, the dealer actually requests the voucher from HVIP administrator, which is CalSTART, and we electronically will reserve that funding for that particular fleet, for that particular vehicle. And then over the course of time, as more information is provided to us, we move that voucher through a process until it finally gets redeemed, which is after the truck is delivered. And we have documentation that shows that, in fact, it was paid for, registered in California, that the purchaser, the fleet, has agreed to the terms and conditions. Then at the same time that the fleet pays for the truck, let's use these drayage trucks as an example. Let's say hypothetically it's a $300,000 truck that's got a $150,000 incentive. So the purchaser only needs to come up with $150,000. And at the very same time the purchaser pays for the truck, right after that, when we've seen the full documentation, we pay $150,000 to the dealer. So the dealer is whole. The dealer has received a total of $300,000, which is the price of the truck. But the purchaser only had to come up with $150,000 to start with. So there's no waiting around to get money back or let alone a tax credit sometime in the future. So it's a pretty easy program on a purchaser who simply has to work with the dealer to provide that dealer with some of the required documentation that we require, things like DMV registration to prove that the vehicle in fact has been registered and is being deployed in California. So it really is easy on the purchaser.
That's great. Thank you, Tom. I think I hear folks in the audience scribbling notes frantically. I appreciate that. Naveen, just to mix it up a little, you have also participated in quite a bit of outreach, both with the AB 617 program, Prop 1B, and other programs that you help administer. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, from the local perspective, how you try to access folks who may not have heard about the programs that you run.
So specific to AB 617 or Community Air Protection Program, our staff regularly participates in the community steering committee meetings to inform the local community of any available or upcoming solicitation opportunities. However, there are still hurdles there, and I think the next panel may be discussing that a little bit more. But we are looking at how to improve on that even more than just at the steering committee. We are leveraging outreach resources, and I think Heather in the earlier panel described the Clean Truck Center, and both ports not only partner with us with funding, but also on outreach to leverage their resources, specifically the Port Drayage Registry, where we do some specific outreach, email blasts, even phone calls directly to the owners, letting them know of these funding opportunities to turn over those trucks. The challenge at the communities, though, what we've seen more recently is the desire by the community steering committees to provide funds within those communities. And a lot of mobile sources are not necessarily located within. They may provide a benefit, but they're not located within. And especially their goal is also to fund smaller businesses within those communities. So we're looking at a variety of different approaches to try to accomplish that. One of the things we'll be doing is working with the local electeds and their staff, as well as going and doing specific and individual outreach to those local communities to try to make a connection with the local smaller independent owner operators. But as it's been touched on before as well, the challenges there are not only reaching the right individual, but also finding that those smaller entities can meet all the requirements of the grant programs today. One is scrapping, the other one is the incremental costs that may be available. So we'll be working with Air Resources Board as well on submitting a Chapter 6 plan that could evaluate looking at additional funding for those small independent owner operators that are located in those communities. We're looking at broadening our outreach through radio ads or billboards or other social media concepts as well to see how we can reach these operators that are located within the community. But it certainly has been a challenge, and we're going to continue to basically try to implement a whole series of these that I talked about, including possibly working with firms or outreach entities that are located within those communities to, again, further stimulate the applications from those communities. So it's a challenge, and we're continuing to look at every which way to try to improve that direct line of communication.
That's great. Great to hear about the direct line with various communities in terms of helping get the word out there for various programs. Very exciting. Elizabeth, you help oversee a number of these types of programs. Can you talk a little bit about the various outreach efforts that you've undergone or will be undergoing?
Sure. I think that as the person who submitted the public question indicated, it's been challenging to reach a number of populations and vehicle sectors. A lot of our funding in the past has targeted early demonstrations and really understanding the research and the uses for these technologies. But I think we're at a point now where we really want to ramp these programs up and really get, from the CEC perspective, really get infrastructure out to communities that haven't yet entered into the ZEV market and are in need of help with ZEV infrastructure. And so I think the one thing which I mentioned a little bit before is we're really excited about our block grant program, and I know that we're going to be looking to CalSTART and Tom to really understand their lessons learned and combine it with our stakeholder input so that we really do targeted outreach and are really reaching those populations that haven't yet received funding and maybe aren't yet fully knowledgeable on the topic. So I think it's going to be a collective effort, but it's going to be something that we put a lot of time and energy into, because I think we're at this point now where if we aren't reaching everyone, this isn't going to be effective. So I think it has been slow, but I think it's going to be a big push this year to get to people and to conduct really strong outreach.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. As we think about winding down this session, which the next session will be beyond Project 800, I'm wondering if we could potentially, plant some seeds for future conversation. And I'm wondering, how we've seen the zero emission truck market evolve over time, the changes we've seen in HVIP, and then potentially, some of the challenges that maybe manufacturers are facing, with COVID or otherwise, that we as policymakers should be thinking about. Tom, I'm just wondering if you could kind of walk us through a retrospective of kind of where we started, where we are now, and challenges we should be thinking about moving forward.
Well, to go back even a little farther, if we look over that 11-year timeline, boy, we've had explosive growth in these last few years of HVIP. So when HVIP started, it was $20 million a year, sometimes $5 million a year. And then starting 3 years ago, it went to 35 million, 135 million. And last year, in the first 10 months of the calendar year, $280 million of voucher requests in 10 months. So we sold out of funding very quickly a year ago. In fact, HVIP hasn't given out a voucher in over a year now. So, and then COVID hit. So, the combination of closing down HVIP because we ran out of money, COVID hitting. So the industry, we believe there is this pent up demand, but by the same token, we know that some of the factories had shut down for a while. I think things are opening up again, and we're very optimistic that things are going to take off once again. But it's been a peculiar perspective here of these last few years of explosive growth, which really we ran out of money unexpectedly soon. $280 million of demand in 10 months, and then we had to close for a year because last year the GGRF revenue didn't come through because of COVID. As the economy shut down, there just wasn't revenue coming into GGRF. So we kind of missed a year of funding, and now we're about to launch again. As I mentioned, in April, we should open up again to new voucher requests, and we're very optimistic that we should see once again a robust interest in zero emission trucks, and specifically what we're talking about today. It is so exciting that these zero emission tractors are coming to market. That's sort of on the heels of, we've had early success in zero emission transit buses. We always have to remember that the history of zero emission drivelines isn't just trucks. It really started in transit, and then it's moved over to trucks. So I think we'll see a parallel of some of that intense growth, which started in transit, has now moved over to the truck space. And I do believe that we'll see drayage trucks be a really exciting space in this coming year.
That's great. Yeah, thank you for taking us down some of the history of what we've seen over the last 10 plus years.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elizabeth and Naveen, just as you're looking forward and thinking about aligning efforts around Project 800, I wonder what lessons learned or considerations you're weighing or input that you'll be looking for stakeholders for, as we look towards this next year, and particularly in supporting the zero emission drayage truck market. Naveen, would you like to go first?
I can go first, but I was going to offer up the ladies first concept. But really, there's, having worked on these incentive programs, and Tom laid it out very well. Clearly, there's two common themes that are constantly mentioned. One is incremental cost, and then the other one is infrastructure. So we think that, for the independent owner operators, that incremental cost hurdle is fairly huge. That, if today's electric truck, and on average, what I've seen is a price of about $500,000 when sales and federal excise taxes are included, continues to be a pretty big hurdle for those independent owner operators. So that even the 10% of that cost would be pretty out of reach, considering some of these smaller entities have limited funds and really, low credit ratings that cause them to finance at a very high rate. We have to look at those type of aspects. So maybe a tiered approach for those funding amounts is something that we should all collectively focus on to get these vehicles penetrated, especially into the hands of the smaller owner users. I have a lot of other thoughts on, using onboard telematics and making the process simpler for reporting that can be automated with zero emission trucks and their capabilities now. looking at the cost of electricity for providing long-term certainty to these fleets, because today the demand charge holidays will likely end in the next 2 or 3 years. So what happens after that? And right now the IOUs would have to recover it. So we have to kind of address that aspect. We should consider maybe looking at allowing new purchases as well, because the zero emission trucks are clearly going to have reductions above and beyond those, and will displace the vehicle miles traveled with, higher emitting diesel trucks today. Tax impacts. Today, we, in our grant programs, offer up a large grant, but then we give them a 1099, recognizing that grant that creates some pretty significant tax implications for even the small independent owner operators. So that's something to look at. Insurance costs is something to look at. And then scrapping continues to be a requirement in a lot of our programs, not HVIP, but a lot of the other state incentive programs. Certainly that needs to be addressed as well. So these are just some of the concepts that I'd like to continue to work on, especially for future incentive programs.
Great, thank you, Naveen. I see we're at time, but Elizabeth, I don't want to deny you the opportunity of any closing remarks. Are there any kind of final thoughts you'd like to share with the audience?
I'll just quickly say that I think we're going to work on balancing getting funding out for commercial readily available technology with continued demonstration and research funding, because I think emerging technologies are going to be the key in addressing many of our existing barriers and challenges. So I think some things we're going to continue to be working on is resiliency, renewable integration, cost management, interoperability, and standardization. So I think there are some bigger challenges, but we'll balance the two to get funding out, but also to continue with emerging technologies.
Very exciting. Well, I want to thank this amazing panel for your participation today. And thank you to those in the audience who are watching, and in particular, thanks to those of you who submitted questions. So with that, it's my pleasure to tee up the next panel, Beyond Project 800. Bill McGavran, over to you.